From the chariots and bows of ancient Egypt to the swords and spears of Rome, to the tanks and planes of Britain and Germany, there have been many armies, great and small, throughout the ages. These armies have had thousands and thousands of leaders, some great who were loved by their men and led great victories, and some were failures of both their men and their causes, losing battle after battle. This is the list of the 100 leaders who were the greatest in history. This list attempts to take into account their battlefield strategy, overall grand strategy, as well as how they handled logistics, and what they were able to accomplish with the number of troops they had. Please also keep in mind that while I do think this is a good list, at the end of the day it is my own opinion, and it's just for fun. Number 80. Amr ibn al-As. Early in the history of the Muslims, they were largely just a group of nomadic Arab tribes, and yet they managed to take on two of the largest empires of the time and win, gaining them much territory. They managed to do this because they had great military leaders, and one of those generals was Amr ibn al-As. Early in the conquest, Amr was sent with an army to Palestine to subdue it, as he was familiar with the area. He fought several battles with the Byzantines, who controlled the area, and was victorious over them, forcing them to flee. In response to the defeats, the Byzantines returned with their full force in an attempt to repel the Muslim armies. Amr was a key leader in the Battle of Yarmouk, which resulted in the total defeat of the Byzantines. After this, the entire region of Palestine and Syria was brought under Muslim control. From his base in Gaza, Amr then went on to Egypt and brought the entire region there under his control. He stayed in Egypt for many years as governor of the region, and although he would fight in some civil wars and skirmishes later in his life, his conquest of Palestine against the Byzantines still have him revered as one of the greatest generals in Muslim Arab history. Number 79. Jean Lannes. During the Battle of Ratisbon, after multiple waves of his troops had been repulsed, Jean Lannes' order to charge went unanswered, and he was so enraged that he grabbed a siege ladder and charged the wall alone, having to be physically restrained by his men from scaling the wall himself. This was a microcosm of what made the brave and charismatic but often reckless Lannes a great leader. Early in his military career, he fought with Napoleon and, after great leadership at the Battle of Arcole, earned praise from the future emperor for his service. He was a key figure in the early campaigns against Italy, and after becoming a marshal, he fought in many battles against Austria, Prussia, and Spain. Lannes was always bold and leading from the front. While this is what made him a great leader, this was also his undoing, and at the Battle of Aspern-Essling in Austria, he was hit by a cannonball and died 9 days later from the wounds. While probably not directly the cause, the death of Lannes did closely coincide with the beginning of the decline of the French Empire, and Napoleon himself mourned his death, lamenting that he had lost a great leader and a dear friend. Lannes is still remembered as one of the best French marshals to serve under Napoleon. Number 78. Stanislaw Koniecpolski. When thinking of powerful nations, Poland and Lithuania are typically not two nations that jump to mind. But in the 17th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a large and powerful kingdom, and one of the greatest generals to come from that kingdom was Stanislaw Koniecpolski. Koniecpolski made a name for himself, helping to put down rebellions and defend their borders, often against Tatar forces. However, where he excelled and became a legendary general was in his battles against Swedish King Gustavus Adolphus. Adolphus was one of the greatest generals of his time, and he led a force into Poland, defeating the King of Poland-Lithuania, King Sigismund. Koniecpolski led his force from the south, where he was at the time, and met the Swedes. Over the next 3 years, he fought a series of battles against Adolphus in northern Poland that ended with a Polish victory, forcing the Swedes out of the country. While Koniecpolski would go on to lead for another decade, these were the battles that defined his career and set him apart as one of the greatest generals of the time. Number 77. Cao Cao. The Romance of the Three Kingdoms depicts a vicious, tyrannical warlord who killed anyone that crossed him, while many other sources talk about a leader who was merciful to those who submitted and led with grace. Whatever the truth may have been, what we know for sure is that Cao Cao was one of the greatest military leaders of the Three Kingdoms era in China. The founder and leader of the Wei dynasty, Cao Cao went from a regional warlord to the most powerful and feared man in China. During his early years, there was much turmoil, as a weak emperor meant that many different factions and warlords were vying for power. When Dong Zhuo seized power, Cao Cao joined the coalition against him. This gained him some regional strength, despite the coalition falling apart almost immediately. When Dong Zhuo was betrayed and murdered, Cao Cao took advantage of the resulting power struggle and began to unite the tribes in the north of China under his rule. Over the next few decades, he would unite the entire north of China and bring it under his control, which would come to be known as the Wei dynasty in the Three Kingdoms period. Cao Cao had made his Wei dynasty the strongest of the three and would attack south against the rival Shu and Wu regions. He was defeated at the Battle of Red Cliffs, and this would thwart him in his efforts to unite China, but he had built the strongest dynasty of the time and is still one of the legends of Chinese history. Number 76. Xiang Yu. The 3rd century BCE in China was an intriguing period that was full of political strife and constant fighting. Many of the greatest generals in Chinese history come from this time, and one of these leaders was Xiang Yu. Xiang Yu was one of the first to rebel against the failing Qin dynasty and experienced the most success early in the rebellion. He, along with Liu Bang, were the primary reason for the fall of the Qin dynasty, and he ruled a vast amount of land, declaring himself king of Western Chu. This brought him into conflict with his former ally, Liu Bang, and the two would fight a bloody war for control of China over the next several years. Xiang Yu won the early battles of this conflict and seemed to be on his way to control all of China, but the cunning of Liu Bang, along with the brilliant strategies of his generals, resulted in the sound defeat of Xiang Yu. In the last battle, with his troops deserting him, Xiang Yu made a desperate attempt to escape, but was surrounded, and seeing he had no hope, he took his own life. While Liu Bang's Han dynasty would rule for the next few centuries in China, there is no doubt his greatest rival Xiang Yu is one of the greatest leaders China has seen. Number 75. Baji Rao. Even into the 20th century, the well-known British general Bernard Montgomery studied the military tactics of Baji Rao. Baji Rao was known for speed, having his cavalry live off the land and moving so quickly that he would completely overrun his enemy before they could respond. His conquests took him across most of modern-day India. He started on the western shore of India and would travel all across the country, conquering many areas such as Malwa, Gujarat, and Sindh, along with others. He also fought one of his main rivals, the Nizam, defeating them and forcing them to make peace. Despite Baji Rao dying at the age of just 39, he had greatly extended the Maratha Empire to one of its greatest points, and his military tactics would be studied for generations to come. Number 74. Nurhaci. The Jurchen, or what is known today as the Manchurian region of China, has had a reputation as a group of feared fighters and raiders who always pressured their neighbors and eventually created one of the largest empires in history. This reputation was largely a result of the military success and conquest of Nurhaci. The Jurchen were a group of remote tribes in the Manchurian region of China. Prior to the 17th century, the tribes were under Ming Dynasty control and were not united. Nurhaci came to power and began to work to unite the Jurchen tribes. He allied himself with Korea and Ming China as he united the Jurchen peoples. Over 2 decades, Nurhaci battled the tribes and one by one brought them under his banner. With the Jurchen united, Nurhaci proclaimed himself Khan and created the Jin Dynasty, which would later become the powerful Qing dynasty. He then turned his attention to China and conquered large amounts of territory. And while he died before he was able to conquer all of China, his Qing Empire he had created would go on to become one of the largest empires in history. Number 73. Charles Martel. It's hard to imagine the fear that gripped Europe as the Muslim army of the Umayyad Caliphate conquered the Iberian Peninsula and then began their conquest into modern-day France. Their forces seemed completely unstoppable, plundering many monasteries in the region, and they were headed for the rich monasteries of Tours and the territory of the Franks. The leader of the Franks was Charles, who would later be given the nickname Martel, or the Hammer. Charles had recently consolidated his power over the region. After the death of Pepin of Herstal in 714, there was a power struggle in which Charles came out with control of the Franks. In the years leading up to 732, Charles spent time uniting and bringing many tribes and regions under his control. It was as late as 730 that Charles was able to subdue the Alemannia region in southern Germany. With the entire region now under Frankish rule, Charles was able to prepare for the arrival of the Muslim army. The Muslims had avenged their only defeat in Europe by defeating Otto, the Duke of Aquitaine. With Aquitaine defeated and Otto forced to flee to join Charles, the Muslims headed for Tours. Charles met them, and at the famous Battle of Tours, soundly defeated them, completely destroying their army and forcing them to retreat. This was one of the most important battles in history and cemented Charles' legacy as Charles Martel. Number 72. Sun Tzu. The greatest victory is that which requires no battle. Any list of men who fought wars would be incomplete without the man who literally wrote The Art of War. Sun Tzu is the only man on this list who is here not necessarily for battlefield success, but solely for his military theory and ideas of how to fight. The Art of War was written as a blueprint for how to fight, but is used today by people from the military to business all the way to politics. While Sun Tzu was a military leader who did win at least one battle that is known, records from that time are scarce and we don't know much about his battlefield leadership. However, Sun Tzu and his writings are read still, and his ideas from The Art of War are hugely influential even today. Number 71. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Decades of decline prior to the 20th century had led to the Ottoman Empire being called the sick man of Europe, and a defeat in World War I finished off the failing empire. This laid the way for the man who would go down in history as the father of the Turks. Ataturk rose the military ranks leading up to World War I, and during the Great War, despite the Ottomans being completely humiliated, Ataturk was the only leader who won a victory for the Ottomans, and he gained a positive reputation during the war. The Ottoman Empire, being a defeated nation at the end of the war, had a series of harsh treaties imposed on it, and lost all of its territory outside modern Turkey, officially ending the Ottoman Empire. Ataturk led the revolutionary group that opposed the Sultan, and also opposed the treaties imposed by the British. Several nations, including the Greeks and Armenians, attempted to take territory, and Ataturk defended against several nations in the war for Turkish independence. The war ended with Turkey victorious, and the independence of Turkey was declared. Ataturk was elected the first president of Turkey and is known as the father of the Turkish state. Thanks for watching. I do hope you enjoyed that video. Either way, leave me a comment letting me know what you thought of it, and I will see you all in the next one.